YouTube! Welcome to day 7 of my birthday countdown vlog. Today I will be talking about when I was 33, because it's 33 days before my 40th birthday. And that would have been the year of 2005. That was a very, very difficult year. In general, I mean, the year started off fine. But the reason it was a difficult year and why I've actually struggled thinking about how I want to approach this video is because that is the year that my mom passed away. There is a very complicated history behind my relationship with my mother. I will not go into all the details today because I could sit here talking for 2-3 hours and, well, no one wants to sit watching me talk for that long. I'm sure 15 minutes is already giving it a stretch as it is. Suffice it to say that my mom struggled a lot with issues, and part of her struggles resulted in alcoholism and drug addiction, primarily to morphine, and to smoking cigarettes. She was a 3-pack a day smoker. And all of those things ultimately led to her passing. She died of a multiple organ failure, and she was about 57 at the time, I believe. And I had not heard from her for about 7 years before she passed away. My grandmother had passed away 7 years before, and she basically knew that my uncle and I would try and get her back into rehab again, and she did not want to be rehabilitated, and so she just kind of disappeared. And it turned out, we found out after she passed, that she had a friend that she had ran away to and slept on his couch and stayed in his place, and then found other means to survive and stay housed. I had always feared that she would ultimately become homeless, and she actually did keep herself off the streets, and I was actually rather surprised and proud of her for that she actually managed to stay off the streets despite all of her struggles. At the point when I last saw her, she was no longer employable by any means because of her addictions. And my uncle and I had arranged a number of services to be lined up to help her. And when she disappeared, it was much to our dismay, and we never knew if we'd hear from her again. But then, one day out of the blue, she ended up in the hospital dying of organ failure, and she happened to have my uncle's contact information. He was her brother, in her purse, and they contacted him, and that's how he found out, and then he immediately called me and told me what was going on. I happened to actually be in a beauty salon at the time. I was getting highlights in my hair, and you know, the phone call comes in, and I'm running out of the salon, out into the street, no, not the street, but the sidewalk, outside of the salon so I could hear better because it was very noisy in the salon. And here I am with the foil tips all over my hair, trying to talk to him and trying to figure out what was going on, and it was just, you know, so surreal and so bizarre and so out of the blue. Obviously I went back into the salon afterwards and finished getting my hair done as quickly as possible. My stylist was very understanding over the situation. And then I ran home as quick as I could to book a flight out to Chicago and call my boss and say, hey, I need to take bereavement leave, because my mom's, actually at this point, she wasn't gone yet, but she was brain dead and it was imminent, and so I was like, screw it, I'm just taking bereavement leave, because I knew she wasn't going to last the night, and I was right. And so I was able to take the next 5 working days off. That was the company policy. And so I flew out to Chicago and spent the week with my uncle and his wife in their house out in the suburbs. And after my mom actually passed before I even got a chance to get out there, so I actually did not see her. And he and his wife were close by, so they went and saw her the day before. And from what they told me, she was a skeleton of herself. Was not even recognizable anymore. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't go see her. It's probably not a memory that I need to have in my head. Um, there was so much trauma, and there's so much tragedy and so much emotion, having had dealt with all of the struggles with my mother, that it might sound crazy or cruel or unfair or unjust, but her passing was a relief. I no longer had to worry about her. I no longer had to worry where she was she safe, was she on the street, what was happening to her. I wondered for a long time. We looked for her for a long time, but she kept herself quite well hidden because she knew we were going to put her into rehab again, and she refused. And that was, if anything, the one thing my mother taught me was you cannot help people who do not want help. It was a very hard lesson to learn, but it's something that I think is important to know, is that, you try and you help, but if the person truly, honestly does not want to be helped, you've got to walk away, you've got to stand back, you've got to try and keep your own sanity. Part of the difficulty with that trip was trying to recover some of my mother's possessions. I didn't want money. She didn't have any money. She was practically destitute at the time. The only things I wanted were memories, photographs. There were music albums, LPs that she had, things that connected me back to my childhood, to her, to my grandmother, to my family. And those were the things I wanted to hang on to. To me, those were more precious than $1 million in the bank. Seriously. I mean, I would have forgone anything to get some of those memories back. And we tried to contact the lady where she was renting a room from, and this was the most tough part of the whole thing. She talked to my uncle first, and she immediately said, "Oh, you're her family? Oh, you live in the suburbs? Well, sure, I'll let you have her things for $2,000. My mother's possessions. She wanted us to bribe her to let us have them. After I arrived in Chicago, he called her again and said, "Hey, her daughter's here. Could we please come over and take a look and see what belongings she had?" And at this point, the lady said, "Sure, you can come and look for $4,000. I mean, she just kept upping the price. She was an elderly lady. She was on Social Security. Admittedly, she was probably struggling as well. I did not have very much money at this point. I mean, I did have a job, but I was struggling with credit card debt. I was actually in a debt management program at the time, and I had very little money at my disposal. In fact, it was actually not easy for me to scrape up the money to get the ticket to go to Chicago in the first place. So this was a very difficult time for me financially. And my uncle was so fed up and angry with everything that we had to deal with my mother, that he was like, I'm not paying that money. I've got to think about my future and my retirement and my wife. And so neither one of us were willing to give the bribe money to get to my mother's belongings. We did drive down there. We knew the address. We went to the local police precinct and asked, "Gee, could we get some assistance for this?" And they let us. They sent an officer with us, and he knocked on the door and he talked to the lady. And my uncle and I were behind him, and said, "Hey, come on, let these folks in. Just let them collect the belongings from your tenant, and we'll be on our way." And this woman shouted, and she looked straight at me, shouted and screamed at what a horrible daughter I must have been to have abandoned my mother the way I did, when it was my mother who just disappeared. I had been looking for her. She just disappeared. She did not want to be found. I did not abandon her. I was trying to find her. I was trying to make sure she was well. This woman didn't know what was going on with our family. But she screamed and yelled at me about being an awful daughter and that I didn't deserve whatever my mother had left. And at that point, I just broke down. I just lost it. I screamed every explicative I knew in the book at her, and I ran out, and it was pouring rain outside, and I just sat in the grass in the pouring rain and just cried my heart out while my uncle and the police officer tried to reason with the woman. In fact, the woman even slammed her door into the policeman's foot, almost breaking the poor man's foot. She could have actually been arrested for assault on a police officer if he had had the mind to, but he said no. The woman was almost 90 years old. She was a cranky, grumpy old lady, and perhaps she was justified in some of her actions. I don't know, but it was a very difficult situation. The bright spot that came from all that was that we did find out that my mother's friend, the one that she had stayed with for a while, had actually kept some of my mother's possessions. So I think all that my mom had was her clothes and maybe some documents like ID cards and things with her at the location where she was living at the time. But all of the boxes with her albums and photos and other family memorabilia were actually stored at this other person's house in his storage locker. And so my uncle and I were able to go through them. I mean, there must have been 20 boxes, and there was furniture and everything. I didn't keep any of the furniture. And I whittled it down to about 2 or 3 boxes of things that I felt were the most precious to me, including one album. There's a pop singer from the 1950s, 1960s called Freddie Quinn. He was very big in Germany. Didn't make it very big in the US, but he was very big in Germany. And we had one of his albums of German folk music. And it is one of the most obscure albums of his. He has recorded something like 20 or 30, maybe 40 LP albums in his career. In fact, the man he's like 85 years old, and he's still alive, and he's still recording, and it's pretty cool. And most of his stuff has all been kind of German pop music, but he did this one album of German folk music, and it wasn't a very popular album, but we always played it during the holidays for Christmas, and to me, it's Christmas music. It's actually not Christmas music, it's just German folk music. A lot of songs about wandering and things, but to me, it's not Christmas if I don't hear this album, and I hadn't heard it in many, many years. And so it was the one thing out of everything else that meant the most to me to get back, and I found it among all those possessions, and I was so grateful to this gentleman. And I told him anything else that we left behind, he was more free. He could keep it, he could sell it, he could throw it out. I honestly didn't care, but I bequeathed everything else that my mother had left with him to him. And there were a number of things. There was knickknacks and old magazines, and there were some things there that he might have actually been able to sell to a secondhand store or a consignment shop that might have had a little bit of value. And so I'm hoping that he managed to get a little bit of repayment for using his storage facility for that. And after that, I just stayed the rest of the time with my uncle and just tried to wrap my brain around the whole situation and kind of recover a little bit. And coming back, I was honestly, from an emotional standpoint, quite numb at this point, and I kind of remained that way for a while. 2 months after that, I attended my one friend's crab boil party, which was it was a relief for me to kind of go out finally and socialize and do something fun. And he had this annual crab boil where he would set up a tent in the backyard and some long tables and put brown paper bags over them. And everyone who came to the party brought about a pound of crab legs, and he had this big giant pot with seasoning and Cajun seasoning, and he would just, everyone's crabs would go in there, and he put shrimps and not tomatoes, potatoes and lots of other good things in there, and whole garlic, cloves. And then he'd boil it all up and then dump the entire pot along the length of the table, and everyone just, you just use your fingers and you just go in and eat. And it's a lot of fun. That year, unfortunately, the weather was so bad. This was in August, and the weather was so bad that he had to do the crab boil indoors. I mean, he still boiled the crab outside because the pot was so big and he had to use a special burner and everything to boil it. But then when he served it, he had all the tables downstairs in his basement and everyone was there. And it was at this party, that's when I first met Dave. Keith introduced me to him, and I actually spent, I would say, the majority of that party sitting across the table from Dave and talking. We talked about all sorts of things. We were both a little bit on the geeky side, and we're both, not to sound too arrogant, but we're both smart people. He's definitely a very intelligent man, and we had some really great conversations. And I secretly kind of hoped that he'd ask for my phone number, and he didn't. And well, you saw, if you saw my previous blog, you'd know what happened with how the relationship progressed from there. But that was the very first time I ever met him, and he was kind of cute, and I had a big crush on him after that. But that was that helped make the rest of the year better, because I kept looking forward to seeing him at future parties, and I did. And a year later, obviously, we started dating, and things have gone well since then. But yeah, that was, ultimately, it was a difficult year. I got past it. I'm glad to know that my mom isn't just out there sleeping in the streets anymore. I'm sad that her life ended as tragically as it did, and maybe I will do a future vlog talking a little bit more about her struggles in her life. If you're interested, maybe leave a comment in the comments below, and let me know if you'd be interested in a more detailed accounting. She did have a lot of struggles, and if anything, I definitely learned to not follow the same path that she did, and try and do better with my life. And I hope that I feel I've succeeded in that. Anyway, that pretty much brings me to the conclusion of this vlog, and tomorrow's vlog will be a little bit cheerier and more happy. So thank you for sticking with me, and until tomorrow, bye.